All right, welcome. We are on an Entrepreneurs Forever deep dive, and I'm going to share my screen. You probably don't need to see that. View slideshow. Someone give me a thumbs up. Are we seeing it?
Yep.
Yay, thank you. Okay, I'm Deborah Gallant. Today's workshop is about when your family and friends work in your business. We're going to introduce ourselves and talk just for a moment about our upcoming programs. What I find is we always use up all the time and I never get to talk about them. So I'd like to just tell you what they are up front. Then we'll have our presentation. And the way our program works is we will have 45 minutes to an hour of a presentation. And our guest presenter, Robert, will be introducing himself and telling you more about that in a minute. We record that. It's available for anybody to watch, but we do not record the Q&A. So if you have things you want to ask, like my husband does this awful thing, but you want to make sure that your husband's awful thing doesn't get recorded, it won't be. So save it
on
till the
Facebook.
end and you will be saved. I think most of you know what Entrepreneurs Forever is all about, but all of our presentations start this way. We like to just remind you, our mission is to equalize economic opportunity by connecting often overlooked small business owners with the peers, skills, and support they need to survive and thrive. I have been here about 7 months. I've been running these deep dives actually when I was also at EFRL, so for a couple of years now. Today's topic is when your family and friends work in your business. If this applies to you, you know that it can be pretty sticky. And when I did my research, I found the guy who literally wrote the book. So Robert Fukui is going to be our guest presenter. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit more in just a moment. Let me just tell you about the upcoming learning opportunities before we dig in. May 22nd is funding for your small business. And for those of you who are EFRL alum and go, oh, Deborah, we've heard that already. Raymond Lands a While is bringing us the next generation of that. So you're already in business, you have revenue streams, you have profits you can show. How do you now use all that to get funding for your business to keep growing? So he'll be on May 22nd. And I don't know if it applies to anybody here, but we're doing a Forever Forward on how do you know when to go from side gig to full-time in your business? Because there are a lot of questions to ask yourself. So that one is on May 12th. You can register for either of those programs at entrepreneursforever.org. Here's today's disclaimer. This presentation does not take the place of professional advice from your own paid advisors or, as Robert might tell you, therapist, a marriage and family therapist. I don't know. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. And I worked on this topic actually with the advice and insight of some of my colleagues in our programming department, because it is so logical when you're growing your business to think, oh, the people who are closest at hand is my spouse or my kids are having trouble getting work. So I'm going to bring them in. And it can be extremely tough to find the boundaries and manage those relationships and businesses. So that's how I came up with the topic. I'm going to stop sharing. And I just wanted to ask Robert, do you want to run your poll now?
Sure.
Or do you want to go right into the presentation?
No, let's do the poll first.
All right. So here's the poll. Let's launch it. So pretty easy. Do you currently work in your business with a friend or family member? I added an answer, Robert. Yes, no, or it's complicated, because it can be. And if yes, who is it that's working in your business? Just so that Robert kind of knows who's in the room. Well, obviously, everyone who's here is a yes, so that's a very good thing. And it's about evenly split between his spouse and children.
All right, or spouse and children.
We're going to end the poll. We'll share those results. And you're up.
All right, sounds great. Well, thanks, Deborah, for finding me on Google. So it's good to know that my SEO work has paid off. So that's a whole nother conversation if we want to get into marketing. Yeah, so my background is in Fortune 500. I spent about almost 25 years, almost 30 years in marketing and sales. Started with Coca-Cola, and then from there went into the pharmaceutical industry, where I really spent the bulk of my career. And one of the things I saw kind of early on when it comes to, because a lot of what my wife and I do is consulting small business, small family business, is about helping a lot of married entrepreneurs create greater work-life balance. Um, that's an issue that's just across the board, whether you own a business, whether you're W-2, your C-suite, or whatever. Balancing life can be a tricky thing, and just so many things fill our calendar. And especially when you're talking about business and even in an executive's position, the first thing I noticed when I worked with Coca-Cola was all these high-performing salespeople and executives were spent their life at work. I mean, there was an expectation about spending your life at work, really. I mean, like 12-hour days were supposed to be like the bare minimum. And I knew that wasn't where I was going to spend my career because I didn't think about work-life balance, but I knew I wanted to enjoy life. I like to have fun, but of course I want to achieve and achieve financially as far as professionally. But having a life, enjoying the journey was really important to me. That was a priority for me. So actually, one of the things, the industry I really wanted to get into, even when I was graduating from college, was the pharmaceutical industry. But a lot of them wanted sales experience. So because I had done an internship with Coca-Cola the summer before I graduated, they actually offered me a job, and I knew it was going to look great on my resume. So I already kind of knew early on that wasn't going to be my lifelong career was in Coca-Cola, but I knew it was going to look great on my resume. So I just sucked it up for about 2.5 years, grinded it out, but got a lot of great experience too, because working with a big brand like Coca-Cola, we got to launch Powerade. Right when I started, we launched Powerade. I was working in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So of course, it was right when the World Cup was in the US, and Stanford University was one of the host sites. So got a lot of exposure in event marketing. So a lot of great experience, but really in pharmaceuticals was where I kind of cut my teeth in marketing and sales and experience there. And also saw that even in a big corporation like Bristol Myers Squibb, they did value work-life balance and did value family outside of business. And so one of the things they did actually kind of midway through my career there is when we'd have a national sales meeting, typically it would start on Monday and end on Friday, which meant usually you'd have to travel on a Sunday to get there for a Monday morning start. And depending on where you're living, you might not get home till Saturday. But they cut that out. They said, no, let's want to prioritize work-life balance. And so they said, no, it's Monday through Friday. It was still the sales meeting, but you travel on Monday, you leave on Friday. And so that just meant the Monday start was really more like a dinner, cocktail hour, and more of like a kind of a general conversation. Not the meeting really didn't start till Tuesday. And then we ended Friday morning, mid Friday morning, which meant everybody could get home by Friday evening. And that's just one example of how a large corporation made the change in a big setting to say, hey, we're really wasting a lot of time anyway, Monday through Friday. I mean, not that we're wasting a lot of time, but there's some things we can do to condense the time we spend together and make it valuable. Because at the end of the day, they realized, and we realized that, like, the sales team was saying, hey, nothing gets solved on Monday through Friday in the sales meeting. It's just enough to get the information out, get some conversations face to face, but the real work happens when we get home anyway. So we can compress the time we spend together in a sales meeting so that we can be home on weekends. So all that to say is that was like that thing. Let's say, okay, even a big corporation can value that, and they can even execute on that in a big setting. And so 6 years ago, when I started consulting family business, because of my marketing sales background, a lot of them looked at me for marketing help. And the first thing I did when I looked at their company, I looked at their P&Ls and just looked at the way they operate their business, not just from a marketing perspective, but just from a business perspective, I saw right away that they're just working way too hard. I said, you guys are just because there's some systems and processes are in place, and there's some inefficiencies in the business, you're making it up by just working longer hours, because a lot of them didn't just take the time to stop, get some good counsel, and figure out how do we just do this better, as opposed to just putting more time in. So one of the things, I remember just from in sales, there was a few of the salespeople that would almost brag like they didn't work they didn't take vacations, like 3 to 5 years. They hadn't taken a vacation like 3 to 5 years, which I thought was nuts because they pay you for vacation, right? So I'm like, why do you? And they'd always say we were just so busy, we got so much work to do, and we got to make sure we're performing, our sales territory is performing, and all that. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm like, I've won more sales awards than some of these people, and I take my vacations. I mean, clearly there's no time to outcome parallel. There's no
It's hard to keep that perspective when it's your business and you keep thinking if I just throw more time at it, it'll
right.
obviously do better.
Yeah. But there's all the research you said, there's no distinction between, there's no parallel or direct connection between the time you put in and the outcome of the business. So, for example, like in sales, someone can sell 5 $100 items, or I can sell 1 $500 item, right? And a lot of times that it takes the same amount of effort to sell that 1 $500 item as it is one $100 item. In fact, sometimes it's even more challenging for the cheaper to sell the cheaper item, because a lot of people that are very price conscious are actually a little bit more nitpicky. And so they're a little bit more afraid of jumping and taking the jump to pay for something. And so if you're talking about from a consultant point of view, a lot of times it takes more effort to sell your consulting service at a cheaper price than it is at a higher price. So probably going a little bit off topic, but all that to say is I sort of saw the imbalance, and it wasn't so much about, the marketing wasn't good, their product or service wasn't good. It was really about how they went about their business. And so my wife and I really started going down this path about helping married entrepreneurs create greater work-life balance by helping their business become more efficient and scalable and profitable, but getting time back to devote to the business. So over the last 6 years, we've worked and consulted with, well, family business. And as you can say from what I said, shared earlier, is that most of our clients are married and they work together. Now, some of them don't work together, but the majority of our clients that are married do work together. And some of them, their kids work in the business too. And one client, actually, it's three. The three owners are actually brothers, and so we've had a chance to consult with different combinations of family business and how they work together, spouse to spouse, or siblings, or spouse with their kids. And so there's been a lot of different combinations around that. So we've had a lot of fun. There's been certainly a lot of stories that you're just like, oh my gosh. But at the end of the day, the outcomes we've been able to deliver was just a lot of fun. So really appreciate what we do working with family business, because, and I love this more than when I worked in Fortune 500, because in the Fortune 500 world, you're only as good as your last sale. And you're only as good as your last quarter. And it's always about what the next thing is. But when we help family business, seeing the outcomes we see in the business from a sales and profitability standpoint, that's not even a thing that really gratifies us or even gratifies the client. It's more about kind of the relief, the self-satisfaction, the thing that they're doing good, we're providing for ourselves, our family, but also for our employees. There's a lot of personal stuff that we get to deal with that just seems more gratifying. And the owners just, their appreciation is just on a different level than what
Robert,
it's.
do you find a difference? You call them family businesses. My experience with our crowd at Entrepreneurs Forever is usually it's one person has started the business and it's expanded beyond their own personal ability to handle it all. And the person they look to is frequently their spouse or their child or something like that. But that it wasn't originally conceived as the thing that was going to support the whole household. It was initially conceived of as a single person's effort, but it grew to the point where it needed. I don't know if there's a differentiation or if that changes how the dynamics work.
Well, how everybody's involved will change the dynamic, but the term family business is kind of a catch-all. I mean, it seems to get used synonymous. So it's a privately held business. It's owned by one person, and then a lot of times, yes, the family gets involved, and the fact that it supports the family still, because a lot of times the kids are still at home. So it's an asset that produces income that supports the family, and therefore the family gets involved in some form or fashion. They're involved with the business, whether they're even working in it or not. Because what we found as kids growing up in a family business, my wife's dad was a business owner. My dad was actually a pastor, but the organization they run affected us directly and indirectly. And so that's why we talk about family business. But a lot of times, yes, people that are call it a family business is because there's usually, two or more people in the family that are working in it.
Do you want to get started with the presentation?
Yeah.
And for those who came a little bit late, Robert's going to do his presentation. If you have clarifying questions like I just did, feel free to bring them up during the conversation. But if you have very specific questions to your business, should my husband be a 1099? Do I make him an employee? Do I make him a partner? Those specific kinds of things, we'll wait till the end when we aren't recording.
So what I do though is if you want to just type in, because I do have a couple of questions as we go along, but if you want to just go ahead and type it in the chat, and then we can read that out the side, and I won't I won't call anybody out. How's that? All right. So let me go ahead and start with this first slide. And it's also the first question is oops, sorry about that. What's great about working with family and friends, since it looks like everybody is working with at least one person in a family or friend? What's great about working with family and friends? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Or if you want to unmute and tell us, that's cool too.
Oh yeah, this is a positive thing, so that shouldn't be bad, right?
What's good about it?
Hopefully there's something good.
Alyssa says established relationship already. That's good. As long as it's a good one. Dependable. Usually. I like that, Tanya. Same as Alyssa.
So as people type it in, obviously I work with my wife. And so, one of the great things about working with your spouse or working with someone that you really know is, yeah, like Alyssa says, sharing the same values. You both have the same goals, which is you want the business to succeed because it obviously provides income for the family or for the relationship. So obviously that's a good thing. And so you both want this thing to succeed at a level that's different than an employee, right? Because you really have a little bit more vested interest. I mean, employee, yes, they get a paycheck, but usually if things aren't going well in the business, a lot of times the business owner is the first one to take a pay cut while they keep making sure the employees are getting paid. But all to say is, you've got a partner there that really wants the best outcome for this business and is going to have your back. And so, yes, absolutely. Working with family and even a close friend can be very rewarding because you trust them, as people are saying. Of course, my spouse, my wife is absolutely dependable, and so certainly that's a great thing. And working with your family, working with a close friend can be very, very rewarding. Why do we hire family and friends? And you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Why do we hire family and friends? Besides just you need somebody to fill a seat.
Cheap labor. It's true that you trust them. Mm-hmm. There when you need them.
Goes into reliability again. Yep. Easy to find the right fit if you already know who you want. Typically dependable. Yep. So trust. I put that trust. I put someone needs a job to hopefully preserve relationships because somebody's asking and they're cheap labor. So I got a couple of them in there, right? And a lot of times someone needs a job. So you have either, your spouse is saying, hey, Benny needs a job, and it could be your child, or it could be a cousin or a close friend's children or whatever. But sometimes there's obviously this request because someone needs a job. And then you feel that pressure to preserve the relationship. So then you hire them. So, but why do we hire for family and friends? First, trust is great. Someone needs a job, preserving relationships, and cheap labor. Not very good reasons. That's just kind of a recipe for disaster. That's just something bad, just waiting to happen. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but I'll go to the next question, which is, what's not great about working with family and friends? So there's the opposite part of this.
Come on, all of you came here because you knew this was a sticky issue. Come on, let's surface some of the issues. Oh yes, it's basically impossible to fire them. No boundaries. You got the same one, not respecting a professional boundary. They act like they know what's going on. They let you down. These are all great.
Uh, all right, we are in the right group. Thank God. 'Cause let's see what I came up with, right? Conflict, right? Lack of boundaries, blurred boundaries, difficult to hold them accountable, difficult to let go. Oops, sorry. Um,
I like your effects.
so all that to say is, looks like this is the right group, and I kind of guessed right, right? I didn't guess, obviously, it's from experience, from our clients, and even with myself. But I remember, when I first started the consulting, so I was still working for a pharmaceutical company, and I started doing consulting on the side to start to develop the consulting business, and then to eventually leave. And I remember my wife asked me, "Oh, how can I help?" And I said, "No, I got this." And it wasn't because I didn't think she could do the job. It was more, I thought it was the expressway to a divorce. I thought it wouldn't be good for our relationship. And how do you work with your spouse? And then, like, how I can imagine having to tell her what to do, and all the things that were just going into my head. She does something, wrong, or does something, yeah, doesn't do things the right way, or something like that. I mean, all these conversations are going through my head, and I thought it was just probably going to be bad for the relationship. And so I said, no, I don't, you're fine. I don't need any help. And then, but she kept persisting. And so finally I started getting her little jobs to do, and we're doing, and then next thing you know, we just started working together more and more. And of course, then, especially when I started to realize that, hey, owning a business and running a business and the stress of that is affecting relationships at home. That's when I did ask her to, hey, work with me, because I was finding myself sometimes almost like marriage counseling or marriage coaching a lot of times, because the business owner would start to talk about their personal life, and I would start giving them some almost coaching tips in relationships. And a lot of that was because my wife and I went to 2 years of counseling before we even got married. So that's a whole story in the book. But all that to say is, we hadn't even had our first argument, but we got into counseling. And those 2 years up to we got married, I mean, really what the counselor helped us do is really develop some good tools on how to communicate better and resolve conflict. And all those things that you put up about what is not so great about working in business really comes down to communication and conflict resolution. And so what I found was that we did work well together, and because we had already established how to communicate well and resolve issues whenever they came up at home. And so what happens is, if you can't do it well at home, working together in business will only amplify any weak points in communication, conflict resolution at home. And so just that ability to communicate well and resolve issues and resolve conflict and do it well, is a transferable skill both at home and in business. And so that's what I found, that, hey, if you can communicate well and resolve issues, that you can work together and work with anybody. But that's the issue that we get trapped in as we're working with friends and family, was we don't communicate as clearly. And for some reason, because sometimes when you know somebody very well, there's more opportunities for conflict, because we tend to trigger people too, because we have some emotional baggage from the past that we're bringing into the business. So that's be a topic as we get.
But Robert, let me just
Mhm.
couch this. You can stop sharing for a minute while we have this conversation. I've been married 29 years. My husband and I have never been to a counselor. Knock on something. We haven't needed to. If we worked together, we would kill each other, because we have a way that we can exist in a couple that would never work in my business. I would never bring him into a business. So if a couple hasn't worked out that clear languaging and communication in their personal life, and then they start working in a business, isn't this just a recipe for complete disaster? They
Mhm.
don't literally have a common language around problem solving. They just figured it out in their personal relationship, or love or lust conquered all. I mean,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
everybody's that advanced, right?
Yeah, and well, you said exactly what I said, was that if there's certain communication and conflict resolution issues you haven't worked out at home, that it is going to amplify things in a business, because some of the things you're dealing with a business, um, looks a little different from a operational perspective, but there are some similarities in how you communicate well and resolve conflict at home. So it really is, the issue is, as you're going into business, think about what is it that makes us able to resolve issues. Whenever issues come up and you have differences of personality styles and different ways of communicating, whether it's at home or it's business, you're going to still have those differences. But obviously, you've worked something out at home. So, what is it in business that you can take that same skill and put it in a business? But sometimes, because you're in business, the details look different. But at the end of the day, the issues are the same, meaning that someone, if you're more an auditory processor, for example, and your husband's more of an internal processor like I am, and Kaylee's more auditory, that as she's sharing things in business, I'm going to take it as she's trying to run my business, where all she's doing is just processing it auditorily, and I just need to process with her as opposed to trying to defend my position in the business. So that's just kind of a one example. That may not be your issue, but all that to say is figuring out how you communicate well and what is it that makes you guys able to resolve issues at home, and then you got to just almost like document it. And then in business, when things come up, when you have differences of opinions and you start to butt heads, is take a time out and say, okay, let's go through this. Why can't we do it at home, and why are we having a problem at work? It's kind of go back to almost that cheat sheet of a template of figuring out what is it that you do well in a conversation, that when you have differences of opinion, you're able to work through it. I don't know if
Interesting.
that helps.
Okay.
And we can go into more detail because I have a thing that I've been putting a slide that I sent you earlier about personality styles, using a DISC profile, and understanding people's different personality styles and the way you communicate. Understanding it for yourself as well as the other person will help you be able to resolve any issue. Is that good?
Yep, that was helpful. Did that clarify it for the rest of you? Cool.
So one thing to note, when you talk about potentially hiring family and friends, is it is a business, it's not a charity. And you got to treat it as such. And so cheap labor, like I said, is not a good reason. If you're going to hire somebody, even if it's a family and a friend, pay market rate. I remember one of our clients, the wife was a CEO, the husband was the salesperson, the lead salesperson, and they're looking to add another salesperson. And so I asked, okay, what's the commission rate? I understood, kind of had a basic idea of what the salary was, but what's the commission rate that you're paying your husband? And she said, oh, I don't pay him commission. So I'm like, okay. So that's an example of cheap labor. She was paying him a salary, but wasn't paying him commission. And I said, okay, that can be a challenge. Number one, for two reasons. One is he's still doing the work that you would normally be hiring another salesperson to do. So he's owed that. Number two is when you're not paying commission or paying fair market rate, your operational budget is not is lower than it should be. So which means it's going to be really, really hard to backfill a position or even hire somebody for a position like that when you haven't even paid your current employee, your spouse, fair market rate. So which means your budgets are off. So that's just one small example. But there's also the fact that when you do pay market rate, or back up, when you're paying them a discounted rate, it gets in your head that, well, you rationalize why you don't hold them accountable because, oh, they're working for less. And so there's all these challenges, conflicts in your head that creates the issue. So that's why cheap labor, hiring for cheap labor is not a good reason. You should definitely pay market rate, because if you don't, it creates a lot of different conflicts. Let me move on here. So power of no. When you start getting more requests about, whether you should hire your cousin or a friend or whatever, really learn the power of no. Because as I said earlier, I don't know if any of you have got caught in a situation of feeling almost pressured to hire a friend or family because they asked or they need a job or whatever. And you feel like in order to preserve the relationships, you say yes. Well, you could ruin a relationship anyway. And we've had a client or two that have hired a family member. I remember one was a nephew, and it was to preserve the relationship because her sister asked her, "Hey, my son needs a job. Will you hire him?" And they did, and it just became a mess. As some of you probably have experienced something, how do you hold them accountable? It's really hard to fire them and all that because you want to preserve the relationship. You think it's going to ruin the relationship if you let them go. Um, what happens is it ruined the relationship anyway, because ultimately they did have to let him go because, well, one, he was stealing. So that was a whole thing. And it also created conflict between husband and wife because, the wife was defending him, but the husband, it's not his blood nephew, was saying, hey, no, he's stealing, and, presented all these facts. But that also created conflict between husband and wife because here he is, the wife hired a nephew, he's cheating, she's defending him, he's saying no, so it created a big mess across multiple people. And
I have
so
a similar story where guy who was running a plant hired, these families were friends. The husband was unemployed and the guy seemed to have the right credentials. He came in to run, I guess, the factory floor, and he took advantage of the familiarity with the owner to, oh, it's Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to go golfing with my friend, or, leave early or take more vacation. And it just became really untenable. And basically the families ended up breaking up over it when he was ultimately fired. So what was thought to be like, let me throw my friend a lifeline, ended up actually ruining the whole relationship.
yep. Yep. So learn the power of no, because sometimes you gotta hire for the right reason. Basically, is all I have to say. Is don't just automatically say yes because it's a family or friend. And so that's what we're going to go into here. And whether you wait to the end to ask questions or do it now, that's fine with me. But keys to working well with family or friends. So again, treat it like a business. It is a business. Remember that the people that you bring into the business is going to have an effect on other employees as well as your customers and your vendors. So the people you bring into your business are going to have some form of communication or some sort of interaction with people outside or within and outside of your business. So it's important to bring the right people in, not just because they're related to you or they're a good buddy. So like I said before, pay the market rate. I saw somebody put in the chat about hiring for fit, right? And fit is not just that they're skilled in what they do, but it's also character and integrity. Make sure you're doing your due diligence. Now, hopefully, when you've known, if it's a family or friend, you should, if you know them well enough, you should kind of know their character integrity, and don't rationalize like, oh, like there's actually I had a business partner that all of a sudden, a year or two into the business, um, we're talking somehow about, I don't know, talking personal stuff, and he said, because he brought up his conversation about his fiance, and he said, "Oh, I'm a good liar." And then my wife picked up on that, and he just kind of almost said like he was bragging. And I was like, "That's a weird thing to say." But then I did catch him lying a few times, and they were just like little stupid lies that I don't even know why he was lying about. Um, but I didn't know him to that extent. I knew him, but obviously I didn't know him that well. But fortunately, and especially if you're thinking about bringing on a friend or family as a business partner, outside of your spouse, is making sure you have an exit plan, because we did have an exit plan put into our business plan when we started in partnership. So when it came time to split, because hey, this isn't working, we did have an exit plan to define how we're going to split the assets. So hiring for fit goes beyond just skill set, but character and integrity is huge. I don't know if you've heard this saying, but um, you can teach skill, but you can't teach character. And so, all things being equal, if you have two or three candidates that have similar skill sets or similar experience and abilities, character is always that kind of that thing that takes them over the top, that make it or break it.
Robert, sometimes I'll talk to an entrepreneur who is bringing their spouse in as a partner because there's more work than they can handle. A realtor is a good example, or somebody with a consulting business. I mean, you did it with your own wife. And I think sometimes they come in thinking, oh, well, with you working in it, it'll just be twice as big, but they haven't really thought about who's going to do what. Do you literally create a job description for your spouse and say, if you want to work with me, this is what you're going to do?
Yeah, but I do the job description not exactly that way, but I look at what am I good at and what am I not so good at. If you've ever read the book The Big Leap by Gary, I forgot his name, but The Big Leap talks about the zone of genius. We're operating in four zones: the zone of genius and zone of excellence, competence, and incompetence. And you want to spend most of your time in that zone of genius side, right? So which means there's 3/4 of that area where you might be good at, but it doesn't really light you up. You might be okay at, and then you might be things that you're really bad at. So look at the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so we make a list. I have our clients always make a list of all the things that you're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis in the business. And what are the things that you should really be focused on that'll really drive growth in the business? And what's the other stuff that's busy work that's keeping you from performing well and concentrating on the things that the activities that'll drive growth in the business? And on the big lists that are things that are just day-to-day things that you need to do, but it may not be the owner doing it, those are the things you hire for. And then if you're an example about your spouse, then I look at my spouse and I say, hey, these are things you're good at. What do you think? Right. And
But if
so,
they're not good at it and they still want to work in your business, you need to be aware that you still need to hire. If neither of you are going to handle the finances, well, then you better make sure you have a good bookkeeper and someone's paying attention to it. What
absolutely.
frustrates me is when, like, realtors are a good example because they both are out there shaking hands. Well, someone has to do the paperwork back in the office, right?
Yep.
If neither of them want to do that, then they better hire somebody else. Or Jessica, that's her firm. That's what they do, the back end real estate transactions.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's a big example of, yeah, they'll bring somebody on for, like, if the owner's a good salesperson, they'll bring on another salesperson, or if they're a great engineer, they'll bring on another engineer. I always say, look for the other business activities that are being done that you can pay someone at a lower rate. So whether it's administrative assistant or even a bookkeeper or something, salesperson or another engineer, that's a high level wage item, right? But if you are able to offload some of the other busy work to, someone that you can pay a little less expensive, not an engineering level, but more from an administrative level, that will free you up to do more engineering work or to go make more sales calls, right? It increases your capacity when you unload the things that are actually just bogging you down. And so always look at what it's the lower wage job that you should hire for first.
And I think that is probably an exercise worth doing if it's not too late for all those of you who have people working in your business, to make sure you've thought about how the work is getting done rather than shoehorning the work with the people that you have, because it may not be a fit for them either.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, hire for fit, and then when you're bringing them on, set expectations and boundaries. I think someone put down boundaries earlier. State that out in the front end. And you may probably do that if you brought on a 1099 or a W-2 employee, but for some reason, when you bring on a friend or family, we kind of skip that step. So I would imagine
Do you review your spouse?
No.
Do you review your kids?
I almost sounds like you listened to one of our podcasts, because we interviewed this one husband and wife, and he goes, yeah, I interviewed my spouse. And we're like, you gotta be kidding me. Or did my performance review on my spouse. No, you definitely want to have somebody else do it. And if it's just the two of you, obviously that gets trickier, right? And that's where either you bring in the third party for that, or you just have some, like, I'll just have more questions. Like, so Kaylee and I, we don't do a performance review necessary for each other, but we just put down we make our own lists about what we've done well and what can use some work, and just be honest about it. And because we want the same thing for the business to succeed, that we do tend to be honest, because I mean, what's the point of lying, right? Because we also kind of know when it's just her and I working together.
Well, and the stakes are high. This is your family's income. I'm assuming they're not doing this as a hobby. It makes sense that you both want the business to be successful. And if hiding behind obstacles and the same old familiar fights you have at home, that's not going to be good for your household.
Absolutely. So we don't call it performance review, but we just say, hey, let's put down what we've done well and what we can use some work on. And as we talk about it for each other, then we say, how can I help you? And it might not necessarily be I need to help her in a specific duty, but it may be I might get her help on something, or we find another solution. So that kind of takes the performance issue out of the way because one, as you say, we both want this business to succeed. So we're not going to lie about anything. We both kind of know where where we're good at and what are some of the challenges we face. So just a matter of having that conversation about, okay, this are the areas where we need help or I need help. How do we do this? And so, and then how can I help you in some form or fashion?
Do you have regular meetings? Is that a next slide? I'm sorry if I'm
No,
jumping ahead.
I don't. But yeah, so setting expectations, boundaries kind of goes along with it. We've got our expectations, we've got kind of our job descriptions, we've kind of got our goals and all that. And so we do have weekly meetings. So one of the things that's helped us, we started doing this about 4 years ago, and that helps us not just from a business angle, but personally as well, because our business meeting is not just strictly business. I mean, obviously we're married to each other. So Monday afternoons, so in about 3 hours or 2 hours, no, 2 hours, is our weekly meeting. Mondays at 3:30 Pacific time, we get down and we go through. First, we start with a word of encouragement because I'm bad at encouraging my spouse, and I'm always about fixing something. So it can rub her the wrong way because then it just looks like I'm just criticizing and nothing's ever good enough. And so the first thing on our agenda is about encouragement. We encourage each other. What's the good? And then we go into what's on our calendar, what's some of the personal things we want to do in the next month to year to 2 years. And then on the business level, what are some things that we need to catch up on? What are the things that are what's in the present and what are things in the future that need to be worked on or discussed? And then we close by how can I help you? So
I would I
that's our
would
top.
imagine that having that weekly meeting gives you both I'm going to call it a scaffolding or place to park the stuff you need to talk about so that you can actually have a fun weekend and go away and know that Monday afternoon you can talk about that one work issue that you want to instead of letting it bleed into your personal life.
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly it. That and yeah, and not just that, but just anything, right? And so what happens is it's that intentional time that we set aside to block, no emails, no text, the phone's not in the room, all that kind of stuff, to just talk, right? And make sure we're on the same page and stay on the same page. Because what happens in life, and as life gets busy, you're almost like sometimes like two ships passing in the night, and you're just throwing stuff. Hey, go get some bananas, or can you do this? Pick up the dry cleaner, or can you do this or that? And a lot of times the ball gets dropped because, well, for one thing, I might be thinking about something different, or I might be something on my mind as Kaylee's asking me to do something, and I might hear it, but I don't remember it because you're just distracted, right? So just that intentional time just helps the communication, and it prevents some balls being dropped because it's intentional time that you're paying attention to each other, and you're there to talk about the business at hand. Yep. And obviously, even in the business itself, where with employees and all that, having some regular check-ins on a regular basis really helps the communication flow go a lot smoother. So again, to the next point, communicate often. And I put that in bold because I think we might have a little bit of time to talk about communication. Isn't just about talking about things, even just having that agenda and then going through things. A lot of times, information gets misinterpreted, misunderstood. There be conflict. There's different personality styles, so that sometimes something you say can really trigger the person to get more defensive than they need to be. I don't know if any of you, or just as me, I might say something to my wife and just totally innocent, but she'll get offended for some reason, and I'll be like, what the heck, where'd that come from? So communication isn't just about talking. It's about really making sure everybody understands each other, and that we're not triggering each other, and because that's what sometimes we get gun shy about raising issues, is because we're afraid of the backlash that might come out. Anybody? Is that anybody? Anybody in the room?
Do you actually, like, if you're having dinner, so it's not work time, do you not talk about work?
That is a rule. Talk about boundaries. So that boundaries from a different order, but make sure way we make sure we have a little bit work-life balance is when it's personal time, it's personal time. So at the dinner, once you hit the dinner table, there's no there's no phone and all that kind of stuff, and we don't talk about work. Now, are we successful at it 100% of the time? No. But because it's a ground rule for us that we're going to hold each other accountable. So it doesn't take too long. If I brought something up, it won't take too long that Kaylee will say, hey, shouldn't we be talking about this tomorrow or the next business day? Or sometimes she brings something up and I go, right now during dinner time. So we just catch each other and hold each other accountable. But that's where setting those ground rules to make sure, because otherwise, yeah, when you're working together as husband and wife, it's easy for work to bleed into your personal time. And then it feels like it's 24/7. Because even if you're not working 24/7, but it feels like that because you're constantly talking about it at night or on the weekends.
What are some other ground rules you suggest, not just that you use, but that your clients use?
As far as kind of trying to create those boundaries between home and work. Um, so just yeah, like electronic thing. So it's pretty common once you get after a certain point, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or for me dinner time. There's no more work stuff. I don't check emails. I turn all that stuff off. I turn my ringer off so I don't get tempted by some notification or a text or something like that. Is just to make sure that you're present at home. But if there are circumstances where it might be a true emergency, you just give your spouse a heads up. But it should be a true emergency, not like a lot of times it's someone else's emergency, but it's not necessarily a true emergency. So just making sure that defining what that personal time is, whether it's on a nightly basis and on a weekly basis, making sure that people at work and your customers know. I mean, I'll communicate even with clients like, hey, don't expect me, like when we're onboarding a new client, don't expect me to respond to anything after 6 p.m. Pacific time. Right? It'll come in, and if it's an emergency, you got my cell phone. But if it's not, feel free to text and email, but don't expect an answer until the next business day. Um, and again, and then making sure your employees know or your contractors know, what your boundary is as far as personal time versus business time. And then at home, between husband and wife or with the kids, just making sure, hey, we're going to be present from this time on and on weekends and on vacations, that kind of thing. And everybody just tends to hold each other accountable for that, as long as everybody kind of knows what the ground rules are.
Great.
Which goes into hold everyone accountable. So keys to working well with your spouse is, yeah, you're going to have to hold everyone accountable. And does it get tricky as husband and wife or with kids? Sure. But again, if you set the expectations and boundaries ahead of time, then holding someone accountable is that, hey, you agreed to this, right? So then it's not so much of an issue. But when we just kind of bring them into the business and let it roll, and then they do one thing and you kind of let it slide, and you continue to let it slide and let it slide, then it gets harder and harder to hold them accountable, especially when you haven't set up the ground rules or the expectations and boundaries up front. So that's just some basic stuff, but feel free to ask questions now because I know we're.
So are you done with the deck? Is there anything else?
Just one thing was just, when it comes to communication, if you're not familiar with the DISC, go ahead and just Google it. But this is one of the ways we help understand how to communicate to each other better based on personality profiles. So we got about 5 minutes. I didn't want to go too deep into this.
Yeah, actually, most members of our Entrepreneurs Forever groups have taken a DISC profile. It was part of their intake process. So
okay.
They probably have a pretty good idea. And if you haven't, there are a bunch of different versions of it. And I'll tell you, it has helped me think about how I interact with people. So I think it's a pretty valuable tool.
So the one I can do is I can skip the definitions and just go, okay, anyone that says, okay, identify what is your personality profile in the DISC, and then think of one person that sometimes you have a challenge with in communication, whether it's, holding somebody accountable or whatever it is. Think about one person, a family member, a friend in the business that you might feel challenged sometimes to communicate with. And if anyone wants to just speak up right now, we can go through just a quick, maybe what are some ways to maybe foster better communication with the other person.
Doesn't look like you have any volunteers.
Then I'll just give my own.
Okay.
Okay, I was gonna say I will do it. I
Oh, go
work
ahead.
with my son, and he's 20, and he knows everything more than I do, even though I've been doing this for 24 years. But he's also worked for me he's 20, but he's worked for me for 6 years since he was 14, doing event planning and design work and stuff. So he does know a lot, but it frustrates me when he says stuff like, "Oh, why are you doing it that way? You could do it this way." And, and it's like, you don't know everything.
So what's your personality style in here on the disc?
Oh, I'm a dominant. I'm an Aries. I'm strong-willed, forceful.
Okay.
I might have a little dibble of I, but mostly just get to the point. But I don't know what he is because I've never.
Okay, we'll just do a quick guess. Is he
Okay.
more introverted or extroverted?
He's actually kind of the same personality as me, but he does not like people. So I would say he's introverted. But when we're around people, he's cordial and he acts nice, but he doesn't like to be around them.
Okay. So, I mean, it could be that you might be very closely aligned as far as profiles.
Yes, I'm pretty sure we are. It's like two of the same person. He has most of the time, he has my views, my beliefs. Like when I say we're on a spending moratorium, he's like always like, "You're not buying that. You said spending moratorium."
Yeah.
And
So,
it's like, oh my God, shut up. Stop giving me my words back to me.
yeah, exactly. So he's a big D with, I think, a splash of S, and S's tend to have ask a lot of why questions.
Okay.
So it's just, and especially as a D, so you're both verbal processors, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of it is just processing too.
And
So
we
we
both
take,
scream and yell at each other all the time. Like
yeah,
that
so
is how we
because
communicate.
you're trying to solve a problem sometimes when you get it
Yes.
solved. Where a lot of times, so D's and I's are extroverts and they tend to be verbal processors. And when you're on the receiving end of that, we tend to take that verbal processing as telling you what to do or what they know.
Yes. Yes.
And so what you got to understand is, so here's a key question that works for everybody, for in any situation when you feel in that we call it the insanity cycle. Everybody's talking to each other, but nobody's listening and expecting a
Yes.
different result. Okay, so we call that
Yes.
the insanity cycle, right?
Yes.
Saying the same thing, expecting different results. So when you find yourself in that cycle of insanity, just stop and ask the question, "What do you need from me?"
Ooh, okay. I like that.
So you only need two things. Each person only needs one of two things. They either need you to listen and empathize, or they need a solution.
Now, see, I heard an extra one. I said, do you need to be heard? Do you need to be helped? Or do you need to be hugged?
Yeah. So heard and
I
hugged
like
are
it.
still listening. Do you need to be listened? That's empathy basically.
Yep.
And then helped is, yeah, do you need a solution? Right. So, and then too many times we get caught up into giving a solution when the other person's just processing, because they may not know what they need. Like when you're asking a why question, it really is an understanding question, seeking to understand question. It's
Okay.
not a I want to tell you what you should do question. Right. If it was more directive or this is what you should do, right? The why question is more inquisitive, but we're taking it probably because of the tone in which it's said or asked, we interpret. So we interpret information. 85% is based on nonverbal communication.
Yes.
85% of how we interpret things is based on nonverbal communication, not on what's said, but how it's said.
Right.
And especially with two Ds are very big and maybe could be loud or at least very forceful, at least
Oh,
in
we're
nature.
very
Right?
loud. Yes.
So you're taking that as my son just telling
Personal
you.
attack. Yeah.
Exactly. And he's your
Like, why don't
son.
you just listen to me and
Exactly.
do what you're told?
Exactly. So just for the sake of time, that one key question will help in any relationship, any kind of conflict situation, whether it's at home or in business.
Okay.
That'll work because then it helps you focus how you should be, um, responding.
Okay.
Because we're usually just getting triggered,
Yes.
So whenever, we're just getting triggered and we respond the wrong way when we get triggered, right? So asking that, what do you need from me, will just help you direct where you need to go. If it's just more of a, I just need to understand or just listen, I just need to understand more and just process with them. And you don't
Okay.
need to come up with solutions and tell them, give it all the facts and figures. So hope that
Okay.
helps.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, Robert, let's wrap this up and then we'll turn the recording off.
All right. So yeah, the last slide is just basically just a summary. Is, working with family and friends can be rewarding if you really, number one, do it for the right reasons, right? Making sure you understand this is a business, because every decision you make, and especially hiring people, affects the bottom line. And then hire for fit, communicate, and being able to hold everyone accountable. So if you do things in those orders in general, at least as a template to have things go a little bit better than what it maybe has been. Okay.
That's
So I'm
great.
going to stop there.
Yep. And I am going to stop the recording. And